Coucou, bienvenue à ce tuto à prononciation. La prononciation française, mais je commence avec quelque chose en anglais. Welcome to this pronunciation tuto, lovely to see you. About French pronunciation, but I'm starting with something to do with English pronunciation. I just wanted to take us there first because we do it in English all the time, but obviously as we're just natural native speakers, we don't even know what we're doing when we're using language when it's English. One of the things that people often say to me is, oh, the French speak so fast. It's so fast, Ellie. But the French speak at the same pace as the English, as far as I know, which is 120 words per minute on average. There you go, you can look that up if you like, which is why when I ask you to write something, a 2-minute speech or something, it's around about 250 words that I ask you for, because that's 2 minutes. So why do we think then that in other languages people speak so quickly, or particularly in French? I think it's because of the way that words flow into each other, and it's very difficult to cut them. So when you see them on the page, every word is individual, it has its own space, and it's an individual sound in our minds. But when it's spoken, they merge, don't they? Which is why that 2 or 3 words can actually sound like one when we're listening. But the same thing exists in English. So just a little game, really. Just think about how you say these phrases. Now, don't put your best English on that you would only use for the Queen, obviously. Use your normal way of speaking. We would all say last night, wouldn't we? Last night. We wouldn't say last night, would we? Well, I wouldn't. Last night. So we're dropping that consonant at the end. So imagine then for a non-native speaker, last night, what's that word then, last night? Because they would have learned the T particularly. He stopped breathing. Can't hear the ED in that. It kept still. He was left behind. Don't pronounce the T there. Just that normal. I collect coins. No T again. So it's just the reason I'm sharing that with you, because I think it's a really good example of how it exists in English. And then I've got a book here, and there's absolutely loads and loads of rules about how to pronounce things in English, which we would find absolutely mind-boggling. So what I want you to do is I just want you to feel like, okay, so this is something that can be studied and it can be learned. Okay, and we can pick it apart piece by piece. And what we do in studying pronunciation is we improve obviously the way that we express words when we're speaking. But I think even more importantly, we start to understand words when they're spoken to us as well, much better. Okay, so that was what I wanted to share with you. Now, let's have a look at something similar that's happening in French. So you can see my page there. Yep, you can see in French. So la continuité, la liaison. So la liaison is when we merge 2 words together in French. And you would have learnt this right from the very, very beginning. So things like les enfants, for example. But I think the key word in here is la continuité. That's it, isn't it? It's the continuous way that words flow one into another. So it says here, en français oral, and notice it's oral, on a tendance à attacher les mots les uns aux autres. So in French, spoken French, we tend to attach words together, as in English, de telle sorte qu'on ne retrouve pas le découpage graphique entre les mots, to such an extent that we can't see the graphic, if you like, difference between words. Same in English. Certaines consonnes finales de mots, muettes en général, peuvent, dans certains cas, être prononcées avec la voyelle initiale du mot qui suit. C'est la liaison. So, for example, ils arrivent. So certain final consonants in a word which are generally silent, muette, they can, in certain cases, be pronounced when there's a vowel in the next word. And you know this. It's just another way of explaining it. And so we've got the S. We don't normally say ils, do we? We say, but we do if there's a vowel. And notice actually that that sound actually is more Z-y actually when it runs into the next one. So it's ils arrivent. So even it changes from being an S to a Z really when they merge. Right, well, there's all sorts of rules, but bear in mind what I said to you. It's the same in English. So let's start to unpick some of this. So La liaison est obligatoire lorsque la cohésion entre les mots est maximale, c'est-à-dire. Okay, so it's obligatory to use a liaison when the cohesion between words is maximal, when it needs to be maximized. So c'est-à-dire, which means. So inside groups of words, particularly when they're sort of like figures of speech, but when they're groups of chunks of words, I've talked to you about chunks before, chunks of words that have to go together. So the first one we've got here is, and notice that the S's are Z's, les États-Unis. That's a group, isn't it? That's a functional group together, yeah? Les États-Unis. You would never want to separate those words out, yeah? De plus en plus. That's interesting. De plus en plus. Imagine a double S on there. More and more. De plus en plus. Okay, and inside a group with a noun. So this is probably the most commonly way that you're taught it right from the beginning. Des idées, des idées. Chez eux, chez eux. So we've got the Z there. And actually, can I just note that the Z is going into the E. Chez eux. When you know this word eux, which is their, them, their house, for example, the chez is their place, isn't it? Don't think that the X is sounded as well. Some people think that they need to say eux. And I think it's because of the chez is very often the way we introduce that word. So chez eux. How would you say this one then? Do you want to have a go at pronouncing that? So we've got a little rhythm going there, haven't we? Nice, got a bit of rhythm with it, yeah? So j'ai un excellent copain. J'ai un excellent copain. So notice we've got the Z and the N then being emphasized. We've also got, when we've got an adverb describing an adjective, très intéressant, très intéressant. Usually this gets a little bit of emphasis as well because you want to say really interesting, yeah? So that's where you go to très intéressant. Now, this word is a funny one and it trips people up in terms of pronunciation. So firstly, I want to point out about the word con is that there's no qu sound in French. So it's a K kind of sound for us. It's a k, yeah, sound for us. So you never ever get a qu sound, a qu sound in French. So that's one to completely drop because it doesn't exist in French. Good to know. And then you never pronounce the D in con, because when you do have a vowel after it, funny thing is it turns into a T. So either you're going to stop at con at the end, or you're going to turn it into a T because you've got a vowel. Yes, so quand-il. Right, we've got a nice little rhythm going in there because we've got a few sounds. See if you can have a go at doing that little group there. Okay. Quand ils ont été d'accord. So it's got a nice rhythm to it, hasn't it? And you wouldn't want to, and also when we've got these groups that link together, so it's got a nice sort of like linking together, hasn't it? You don't want to hesitate your thinking time, your moment when you're sort of like deciding what you're going to say doesn't happen in the middle of that group. Because that's when you get confusion. Confusion would be given to the other person because the other person is looking for some rhythm to follow. Yeah, so if you want to hesitate, you might go con, you might stop there. And you'd have to wait and then you decide whether you're going to go with a con or quand-il, depending on what's next. But think about where you're going to take your thinking moments. And that's where the words like alors and donc and du coup and all that sort of thing are quite helpful. Or even adverbs like franchement, you know, things like that. They're quite useful because they give you a thinking moment, but they're kind of standalone type words which you can use without going into a chain. Yep. Okay, so entre le pronom inversé et le verbe. So when the pronoun and the verb are reversed. So prends-en, take some. Vas-y, and that's the to form, or allez-y, yes. Et quand il fait. All right, so that's when we have the liaison happening. Now, there's some times when we don't have liaison. I think when I first started teaching French, I'd say, oh, yeah, we always have liaison. But no, of course, it's not that simple, is it? And actually, when you start to sort of like listen to yourself speaking, you're probably already discerning between those ones that you liaise and those that you don't. You're probably doing it because you've learned along the way how to pronounce things, and you might not have even worked out how you knew that. But let's have a look at some examples. So the PS of ton never gets pronounced, never. And you know that EM sound is on. It's like an N, yeah. So le temps est beau, le temps est beau. So we're never ever going to pronounce that PS. Good to know. Good to know. L'un ou l'autre, l'un ou l'autre. Luca et Sabrina. So you might want to say, oh, well, what about that S? Does that S run into that? No. Luca et Sabrina. And that would happen whatever that S was in front of an and. Okay, so and is a good word for you to be aware of. It doesn't really play in the liaison game. And I'm just going to draw your attention down here. Mon frère est une amie. You never pronounce the T in and. If you did, it would be confused with et, which would be is, yeah, est. So absolutely never does and get involved with the liaison. Okay, so mon frère est une amie. Okay, inside a group with one word that gets accentuated. So, un dossier incomplet. Je bois un peu d'eau. So, un dossier gets the emphasis there, accentuated. Je bois. So, we're never going to say this S. But I don't think you would even do it. I think you naturally know that. But it's good to notice. Prends-en assez. Prends-en assez. I think they're saying that the N is sort of like played down in terms of its liaison. Okay, and then it's a couple more examples. Vraiment. So vraiment, we're not going to pronounce that T when we liaise. Vraiment intéressant. Les adverbes polysyllabiques et interrogatifs. I'm not entirely sure I understand that. But anyway, interrogatif is questioning. Poly, vraiment. I don't know. But vraiment intéressant. So you know now, you use that all the time. So you know, don't use that T. Ah, look, here we go. Ah, quand irez-vous à Paris? Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because we're not using the T, even though we've got the vowel. So think about it as in a question when you're using it and you've got a vowel after it. When it's an inversion. It's an inversion. That's why. Sorry. Quand irez-vous à Paris? And just when you thought it was safe and you decided, oh, well, I know that H's liaise, don't they, in the same way that vowels do? Not always. But I wouldn't worry too much because these are exceptions. They really are exceptions. So let's have a look at the exceptions. So les halles. So I remember les halles is sort of like a marketplace, indoor marketplace. And I remember saying les halles to someone and they just like looked at me as if I was completely mad. And I said, what are you saying? And I said, well, you know, it's an S, it's an H. And then I asked them why, and they were like, don't know, because you don't, do you, about your own language? But there's this thing called the H aspiré, like vacuumed. So les halles, un euro, ono. Voilà, très bien. And then the last comment here is, il existe un troisième type de liaison. There's a third type of liaison. La liaison facultative, which means, you know, that you just sprinkle. Like when you sort of like put salt and pepper, you know, that's called facultative, yeah? You just sprinkle here and there, which you're thinking, oh my goodness, how do you get to grips with that? But don't worry, qui tend à être réalisé en style plus soutenu. It's used by people who are speaking in a much more posh manner, basically. So by sort of like merging those together, you notice it particularly in films, for example, when they want to show that someone is sort of like of a sort of like high society or a very high class, they would then use this running together of the liaison that most people don't use. So that's sort of like a demonstration of sort of like high education or something like that. Okay, a lot of listening this time, a lot less practice than usual, but I hope that explains a little bit and helps you to think about liaison in another way. Bon, merci beaucoup et puis très bon après-midi. À bientôt alors. Au revoir. Au revoir.